The punishment fleet arrived above Earth with enough firepower to turn the blue planet into a glowing scar, and humanity answered with nothing. No orbital cannons unfolded from the moon. No warships rose from the atmosphere. No desperate evacuation signals flooded the void. Across 9,000 Union vessels, alien officers watched the silent planet rotate beneath them, its oceans bright, its cities glowing peacefully on the night side, its weather systems moving with the calm indifference of something that did not understand it was about to be conquered. Then every screen in the Armada went black at once, and a single human sentence appeared in white letters across them all. You are already inside the warning. Fleet Executor Thalen did not move for 3 full seconds, which was the closest his species came to fear. Around him, the command deck of the Dominion Spear erupted into alarms as navigation stars vanished from tactical display. Gravity maps inverted, and Earth's coordinates began to drift across the screen, as if the planet itself had slipped loose from reality. One moment Earth was beneath them. The next, according to every instrument on the bridge, Earth was 30 million kilometers away, then behind them, then inside the fleet formation, then nowhere at all. Sensor failure, Thalen said, because commanders of punishment fleets were trained to name impossible things as errors before they became terror. His chief navigator obeyed by running the correction protocols, but her 4 hands froze above the console before the sequence completed. The starfield outside, the forward glass, had not changed. The moon still hung pale and wounded beyond Earth's curve. The planet was still there, visible, reachable, defenseless. Yet every machine the Union trusted insisted that Earth had become a moving target without moving at all. A second message appeared. Do not fire again. Thalen's jaw plates tightened. Again, the word lodged inside him like a blade because the Union had not fired yet. They had arrived under the authority of containment, broadcasting the ancient demand that had broken 100 younger civilizations. Deactivate all defense systems. Surrender all strategic infrastructure. Accept permanent supervision and live. That was mercy. According to Union law, that was order. That was how primitive worlds learned their place before their ambition endangered the stars. But Earth had used the word again. Somewhere on that quiet planet, someone knew something the Union had not said aloud. Thalen looked down at the blue world and felt, for the first time in his career, that he was not staring at prey. He was staring at a closed door, and something ancient, patient, and very human had just turned the lock from the other side. He raised one clawed hand and ordered a single warning shot at the abandoned orbital platform above the Pacific. The beam struck. The platform split open like a dead shell, and from inside it, something woke up. The thing inside the broken orbital platform did not explode, ignite, or fire back. It unfolded. From the shattered spine of the station, thousands of hair-thin silver filaments spilled into space like roots searching for soil. They spread in perfect silence, catching sunlight along their edges, each strand too delicate to threaten a warship and too deliberate to be debris. The Union gunners waited for a weapon's signature. The tactical systems searched for a targeting bloom, a heat surge, a reactor pulse, anything that could be understood as hostile. Nothing appeared. The dead platform simply opened itself and began connecting to every invisible thing humanity had left in orbit. Fleet Executor Thalen watched the expanding web on the main display and felt irritation harden into caution. Civilizations facing containment usually reacted in one of 3 ways. They begged, they ran, or they died with noisy courage. Earth was doing none of those things. Earth had allowed the first strike to land. Earth had allowed the Union to choose the opening move. Now the destroyed platform was behaving less like wreckage and more like an answer. Identify the device, Thalen ordered. His science officer bent over the console, the pale tendrils along her neck tightening with concentration. Unknown architecture. No active weapons. No shield projection. No antimatter charge. No fold distortion. It appears to be transmitting. To whom? The officer hesitated. Thalen turned his head slowly, and the bridge seemed to quiet around that hesitation. To everything, she said. Around Earth. Old weather satellites awakened first. Their solar panels, adjusted by fractions of a degree, aligning not toward the sun, but toward the shattered platform. Navigation buoys above commercial lanes blinked in forgotten emergency codes. Oceanic climate mirrors, built decades earlier to redirect heat from storm systems, rotated above the equator. Communication relays that had once carried school lessons, medical broadcasts, farm reports, disaster warnings, and wedding calls across continents began speaking to one another in bursts too small for Union translators to decode. The Union's tactical intelligence dismissed each object as civilian infrastructure. Individually, none of them mattered. Together, they began forming a pattern no military database recognized. On Earth, in a reinforced chamber beneath the Indian Ocean, Mara Ven stood barefoot on a cold metal floor and watched humanity's sky wake up piece by piece. She was not a general. She had never commanded a fleet, never worn a ceremonial blade, never ordered another living being to die. Before the Union marked Earth for containment, Mara had been the chief systems architect of the Global Catastrophe Response Grid, a planetary rescue network built after the century of storms nearly broke civilization's faith in itself. Her work had redirected tsunamis, predicted volcanic chain collapses, stabilized failing orbital elevators, and once moved an entire city's power load into hospital reserves during a solar blackout. She had designed machines that saved people too quickly for anyone to remember her name. Now, every nation on Earth had given her the only order she had ever feared: use it for war. The command chamber around her was full of soldiers, engineers, ministers, and frightened young analysts pretending not to be frightened. Nobody spoke loudly. Nobody needed to. The ceiling screens showed the Union fleet hanging above Earth like a black iron storm. 9,000 vessels arranged in a containment shell. The numbers were absurd. The Union had brought enough force to silence humanity without respecting it enough to study it. That mistake was why Mara was still breathing. Orbital node Pacific 7 is destroyed, said Lieutenant Jonas Reeve from the forward console. His voice remained steady, but Mara saw his hand tremble once before he tucked it under the desk. Core lattice survived impact. Filament deployment is clean. External systems are accepting handshake. Mara closed her eyes for half a second. Pacific 7 had been empty. Its crew had been evacuated 36 hours earlier under the cover of a false maintenance quarantine. She had known the Union would target something visible, something symbolic, something they believed would frighten Earth into obedience. She had given them a corpse and hidden a seed inside it. Continue passive synchronization, Mara said. No retaliation. No targeting language. No aggressive bloom. General Amara Sol, standing beside the central display with her arms folded behind her back, looked at Mara without interrupting. The general had spent her life preparing for human enemies, and then the sky had opened to reveal something worse than invasion. It had revealed judgment. Yet in the last 72 hours, Sol had become one of the few military leaders who understood Mara's central argument. Humanity could not beat the Union by trying to look like a stronger version of the Union. Earth would lose that contest before the first hour ended. Earth had to become something the Union had no category for. The first time Mara had explained the mirror net to the emergency council, half the room had thought she was describing surrender. The system had no cannons, no missiles, no glorious warships hidden under mountains. It had weather towers, gravity sensors, orbital mirrors, shipping relays, seismic stabilizers, agricultural drones, rescue satellites, asteroid deflection engines, and civil planning algorithms. So old, that some were still labeled under disaster relief budgets no one had touched in 20 years. It was not built to kill invading fleets. It was built to understand motion, impact, pressure, panic, and collapse faster than catastrophe could unfold. That was the secret the Union had missed. They had measured Earth's military and ignored humanity's obsession with surviving everything else. Union ships are shifting formation, Jonas said. They are scanning the lattice. Let them, Mara replied. A defense minister from the European coalition turned sharply. If they discover what it is before we are fully synced, can they destroy it? Mara looked at the screen where the silver web now stretched between dozens of harmless machines. They can destroy pieces of it. That was not my question. No, Mara said quietly. It was not. The minister went silent, because everyone in the room understood what she had not said. The mirror net was not one machine. It was Earth's accumulated refusal to die, scattered across orbit, buried in oceans, welded into lunar mines, hidden inside flood barriers, earthquake dampeners, medical evacuation routes, and power grids. To destroy it completely, the Union would have to understand humanity's entire civilization better than humanity understood itself. And they had brought soldiers, not historians. Above the planet, Thalen or ordered deeper scans. The Union's systems responded with clean certainty. No planetary defense grid, no active battleships, no military-grade energy surge, no strategic threat. The conclusion appeared on his command display in official bluescript. Earth remains non-compliant, but functionally defenseless. Thalen stared at that sentence for a long moment and disliked how much it comforted his crew. Prepare second strike, he said. The chief navigator turned. Against the planet? No. Against the web. Relief passed through the bridge, subtle but visible. Punishment crews preferred clean violence. They preferred targets that made sense. Thalen chose 6 orbital objects, now participating in the strange transmission pattern, and assigned low-yield beams to disable them. It would be precise, restrained, lawful. It would remind Earth that the Union could remove its toys one by one until nothing remained but obedience. The beams fired. 6 civilian satellites, shattered in 6 different orbits. For one breath, nothing happened. Then the debris stopped spreading. Every fragment froze in place, suspended against gravity, momentum, and the expectations of physics. Tiny shards of metal hung in perfect geometric stillness, forming 6 bright wounds around the planet. Union officers leaned toward their screens, as if closeness could make the impossible less insulting. The fragments began turning, not randomly, but in alignment. Each piece reflected a sliver of sunlight toward another piece, then another, until the broken satellites became mirrors inside a mirror, drawing luminous lines across Earth's night side. On the Dominion sphere, the science officer whispered something in her own language that the translator refused to render. Thalen did not ask her to repeat it. Across the Armada, targeting systems flickered. Distance measurements doubled, halved, then corrected themselves. Firing arcs bent on the display though no object had moved. Union captains began reporting mild navigation drift, then severe navigation contradiction, then total disagreement between visual observation and machine prediction. Earth remained below them, calm and blue, but the space around it had become uncertain. In the ocean chamber, Jonas looked up from his console, his face pale with awe. Mirrornet handshake at 12%, he said. Their second strike gave us full weapon profile capture. General Sol's expression changed, only slightly. So now we know how their beams think. Mara kept her eyes on the screen as the first true map of Union aggression unfolded before her, beautiful and terrible in its precision. No, she said. Now the sky does. By the time the mirror net reached 18% synchronization, the Union fleet had stopped trusting its own eyes. Not because Earth had attacked them, and not because the blue planet had shown any sign of fear, but because every calculation around it had begun to develop a second opinion. Rangefinders argued with visual feeds. Gravity charts corrected themselves, then corrected the correction. Weapon systems claimed clear firing lines through empty space, only to retract them an instant later as if embarrassed by their own certainty. The Armada remained exactly where it had been ordered to remain, surrounding Earth in a perfect containment shell, yet the shell no longer felt like a cage around humanity. It felt like a ring of insects, standing on the surface of something much larger than they understood. Fleet Executor Thalen hated that feeling more than fear itself. Fear could be disciplined. Fear could be named, measured, cut apart, and turned into procedure. But uncertainty had no rank and obeyed no command. It spread through a crew in glances, in delayed responses, in the slight tightening of hands over consoles. It made veterans check readings twice. It made junior officers speak too softly. It made a punishment fleet, built to terrify worlds into silence, begin whispering on its own bridge. Status of the affected region, Thalen demanded. His science officer did not answer immediately, which was becoming a dangerous habit. Her console projected a model of near-Earth space, but the model refused to settle. It showed the planet inside a haze of connected civilian systems. Satellites, climate mirrors, relay towers, sea buoys, lunar reflectors, asteroid monitors, and hundreds of objects the Union database still labeled as non-strategic. The haze was not energy, not shield, not fold distortion. It was coordination. The region is stable, she said at last, but our interpretation of it is not. Thalen turned his full attention toward her. She swallowed. Executor, the human network is not hiding Earth. It is making our instruments predict Earth incorrectly. The words moved through the bridge like cold air. Prediction was the foundation of Union warfare. Every beam, every intercept path, every containment pattern relied on the same principle. Know where the enemy would be, know how they would respond, know how fear would simplify their choices. The Union did not win because its ships were invincible. It won because most civilizations behaved predictably once survival was threatened. They ran toward shelter. They defended what they loved. They gathered their strongest weapons around their most precious places. They made themselves legible. Humanity had done the opposite. On Earth, Mara Ven watched the Union slow down. That was the first victory, though nobody in the chamber cheered. The Great Ceiling screen showed thousands of alien ships holding position above the atmosphere, their formations still beautiful, still disciplined, still lethal. But their rhythm had changed. The fleet's outer wings were no longer adjusting in smooth, synchronized arcs. Their microcorrections came late now, separated by tiny pauses, as if each vessel were waiting for permission from a reality it no longer trusted. Mara had spent years studying disasters, and disasters always had a rhythm before they became visible. A dam did not simply fail. It murmured through stress fractures first. A city did not simply collapse into panic. It hesitated, miscommunicated, repeated old habits after the world had already changed. The Union fleet was not defeated. It was hesitating, and hesitation, in a system built on certainty, was the first crack. Synchronization. General Sol asked. 21%, Jonas replied. Orbital layer stable. Oceanic layer waking now. Across Earth, the sea began to speak. Deep beneath the Pacific, Atlantic, and Indian Oceans, pressure towers that had once monitored tsunami chains shifted from passive observation to active alignment. Buoys built to warn coastal cities of storm surges began exchanging pulses with seismic anchors buried in fault lines. Weather balloons over Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia adjusted altitude by quiet degrees. In the Arctic, Ancient ice monitoring stations opened encrypted channels that had not been used since the last great methane emergency. None of it looked like war. It looked like a planet remembering how many times it had nearly died and deciding that this time the disaster had come from above. A young analyst near the back of the chamber began to cry without making a sound. Mara noticed, but did not look away from the display. She understood the tears. The mirror net was not a secret weapon in the way generals wanted secret weapons to be. It was not a hidden sword. It was a memory of every flood, fire, quake, plague, blackout, evacuation, rescue corridor, emergency ration line, and impossible reconstruction humanity had survived long enough to learn from. The Union had mistaken peace for weakness because it had never imagined a species could pour so much genius into not dying. Then Jonas stiffened. "Unknown transmission," he said. "Not Union command band. Not civilian. It is coming through the lunar relay." General Sol stepped closer. "From where?" Jonas's fingers moved rapidly across the console. "Inside the containment shell." The chamber tightened around the words. Mara felt every minister, commander, and engineer turned toward the screen. For 72 hours, Earth had listened to the Union speak in commands, legal threats, and procedural warnings. No individual ship had attempted private contact. No crew member had broken formation. The invading force had seemed less like a collection of beings and more like a single machine with 9,000 teeth. Now one tooth had whispered. "Decrypt it," Sol said. "It is not encrypted," Jonas replied, and that made the room colder. The message opened on the central display in a language the translation system rendered slowly, as though uncertain whether the words were a trap or a confession. To the planetary system below, "If you can read this, stop demonstrating capabilities. They do not understand restraint. They will escalate until your survival becomes politically inconvenient." No one spoke. The message continued. "Your network is not the first anomaly the Union buried. Ask why your world was marked for containment before your first interstellar weapon test. Ask what they found under your southern ice." Mara's breath caught before she could stop it. For one instant, the Union fleet vanished from her mind, replaced by an old classified file she had been shown only once, 12 years earlier, after a polar research team drilled into a magnetic structure beneath Antarctica that no human civilization had built. The official conclusion had been pre-human mineral geometry. The unofficial conclusion had ended 3 careers, closed an entire research zone, and placed Mara on a list she had never been allowed to see. General Sol looked at her. That was the mistake. She should not have looked like she recognized the reference. She should have asked what it meant. She should have performed confusion for the ministers and analysts now staring at her with growing alarm. But Mara had spent her life telling machines the truth quickly enough to save lives, and her face had never learned the politics of lying. On the Dominion Spear, Thalen, or received a priority alert from internal security. Unauthorized transmission detected from Vessel 37 of the Inner Containment Ring. Origin: Auxiliary Medical Deck. Content: partially intercepted. His command claws curled against the armrest. "Seal that ship's communications," he ordered. "Arrest the sender." The science officer turned from her station, her expression unreadable. "Executor, there is more." "What more?" The human network reacted to the transmission. Thalen looked at the display. The silver haze around Earth pulsed once, not outward, but downward. Lines of light connected orbit to ocean, ocean to continent, continent to the southern polar dark. Far below, beneath kilometers of ancient ice, something answered the mirror net with a signal older than every city on Earth. And for the first time since humanity had looked up at the stars, the ice under Antarctica began transmitting back. The signal beneath Antarctica did not speak in words. It arrived as geometry. Across the ocean chamber, Every screen that could display an image filled with rotating black lines, impossible angles, and layered patterns that made human eyes ache if they stared too long. The symbols did not translate, because they were not language in the way humanity understood language. They were instructions folded into shape, mathematics, wearing the skin of memory. One pattern described pressure, another described distance. A third bent itself through 7 dimensions before snapping back into a simple circle that made 3 engineers gasp at the same time. Mara Ven did not gasp. She stepped closer to the central display as if drawn by gravity, her face lit by the cold, impossible glow of something buried before humanity had a name for the stars. Around her, ministers whispered, soldiers tightened their hands around weapons that could not help them, and analysts tried to build models that collapsed before they finished forming. The Union fleet still hung above Earth. 9,000 ships still waited with their weapons warm. Yet every person in the chamber understood that a second battlefield had just opened, and this one had been hidden beneath their own world. General Sol was the first to recover. Mara did not look away. Mara, Sol said again, sharper this time. What is under the ice? The question spread through the room without needing repetition. It was in every face now. The ministers wanted an answer for political survival. The soldiers wanted an answer for tactical planning. The engineers wanted an answer because machines were speaking to machines in a grammar none of them had written. Jonas Reeve looked at Mara with something worse than fear. He looked at her with trust beginning to fracture. Mara forced herself to breathe. 12 years ago, she said, a polar research team found an artificial structure beneath the East Antarctic Shield. It was dormant, non-reactive, no power source we could identify. Every test suggested it had been there longer than human civilization. A minister swore under his breath, and this was hidden. It was buried before we found it, Mara said. We only kept it quiet. That is not an answer. No, Mara replied, turning at last. It is the only answer that matters right now. Before anyone could challenge her, the chamber lights flickered. The mirror net surged from 28% synchronization to 34% in a single jump, not because Mara had ordered it, but because the Antarctic structure had just offered a map. The network accepted it the way a starving body accepts oxygen. Orbital mirrors corrected their angles. Oceanic towers recalibrated pressure pulses. Lunar mining arrays, still officially listed as excavation equipment, redirected their gravity sensors toward the Union fleet with a precision no human team had programmed. For the first time, the mirror net was no longer merely reacting. It was learning from something that had been waiting under Earth. Above the planet, Thalen watched the containment shell deform on his display. Not physically. His ships remained in formation, their engines steady, their weapons aligned, their crews disciplined by generations of conquest disguised as law. But the tactical projection, the trusted ghost of future movement that guided every Union engagement, had begun to fold inward on itself. Ships that had not moved appeared inside danger zones. Firing corridors opened and closed around impossible angles. The planet below them generated no shield, yet every clear path toward it now ended in contradiction. Destroy the network, Thalen said. His weapons commander hesitated. Executor, we have already targeted orbital components. The system became more active after each strike. Then target the ground nodes. The bridge went very still. Union containment doctrine allowed orbital disabling, infrastructure seizure, electromagnetic suppression, and command decapitation. Direct planetary strikes were permitted only when a species demonstrated extinction-level resistance or unlawful strategic escalation. Earth had fired nothing. Earth had killed no one. Earth had not even admitted it possessed a defense system. To strike ground nodes now would be legal only if Thalen could prove those nodes were weapons. His own instruments refused to give him that proof. The science officer spoke carefully. The active surface sites are registered as climate stations, medical routing hubs, flood control centers, food distribution grids, and seismic stabilizers. Thalen looked at her. And what are they actually doing? Coordinating. The word was too small for what it meant. Thalen understood, then, the true obscenity of the human defense. They had placed their survival infrastructure and their planetary shield inside the same body. Every target was both harmless and critical. Every node protected cities from disaster, and now protected those same cities from invasion. To destroy Earth's defense, the Union would have to destroy the systems that kept civilians alive, and the humans had made sure the entire galaxy would know it. For the first time, Thalen wondered whether Earth's silence had not been weakness or restraint. It had been bait. In the ocean chamber, the Union's next move appeared before it happened, not as a warning, as certainty. A line of red probability cut from the Dominion's spear toward a cluster of mirror-net nodes along the Pacific Rim. Mara watched it form with cold horror. The nodes were buried beneath coastal stabilization fields, protecting millions from tectonic displacement. If the Union fired at full force, the beams would not merely disable the network. They would break cities that had survived earthquakes, floods, and the long labor of rebuilding. General Sol saw the same line. Can we block it? Not yet, Jonas said. Synchronization is climbing, but ground layer defense is incomplete. How long? 7 minutes. On the screen, the Union firing estimate dropped to 4. The room absorbed the difference like a wound. Mara's mind moved faster than panic, because panic had never saved anyone. The mirror net could not block the strike. It could not redirect enough force without full synchronization. It could, however, mislead the targeting solution, but doing so would require a sacrifice. The network needed a brighter signature, a more convincing target, something the Union's weapons would choose over the real ground nodes. Mara turned toward Jonas. Bring up the Atlantic elevator. He stared at her. Mara, no. Bring it up. General Sol stepped closer. What is the Atlantic elevator? Jonas answered because Mara was already entering authorization keys. A civilian orbital lift above the Eastern Ocean. Decommissioned after the cable failures. There are still maintenance crews aboard the upper ring. How many? Sol asked. 12. Mara said. The chamber fell into a silence, so complete it seemed to remove the air. Mara opened a direct channel to the elevator's emergency band. A man appeared on the side screen, older, gray-bearded, wearing a stained maintenance harness over a thermal suit. Behind him, alarms flashed in a narrow corridor. He did not look surprised to see her. That was the first thing that hurt. Dr. Van, he said, we were wondering when you would call. Mara's throat tightened. Chief Halden, I need the upper ring lit to full emergency output. Every beacon, every reactor reflection panel, every heat source you can safely overload. His eyes moved once to someone off-screen, then returned to her. That will make us look like a command node. Yes, and the Union will shoot us instead. Mara did not lie. Yes. General Sol reached for the console. We can evacuate them. Jonas shook his head before Mara had to. Not in 4 minutes. On the screen, Chief Halden smiled faintly, and the expression was so human, so tired, so full of understanding that it broke something in the room without making a sound. Dr. Venn, this elevator was built after the famine storms. We lifted grain medicine, whole hospital wings through that ring. My crew knows what this machine is for. It was built to save lives, Mara said. It still is. One by one, 12 maintenance workers aboard a forgotten structure above the Atlantic turned their dying station into the brightest target in Earth orbit. The Union fired. The beams bent away from the Pacific Rim and converged on the elevator's upper ring in a white storm that erased every camera facing it. For 2 seconds, the chamber saw nothing but light. Then the feed cleared, and the Atlantic elevator was gone. No one spoke. No one moved. Mara stood with both hands on the console, staring at the empty point where 12 people had just bought Earth 3 minutes. Then the mirror net reached 41%. Across the planet, every disaster siren sounded once, not in warning, but in acknowledgement. The Antarctic signal pulsed through the network like a heartbeat. The fragments of destroyed satellites shifted. The ocean towers answered. The lunar arrays locked in. The Union's third strike solution formed, targeted, and vanished as the mirror net swallowed its mathematics before it could become action. Above Earth, Thalanor's weapons systems shut themselves down. Not damaged, not hacked, not destroyed. Refused. A final message appeared across the Dominion Spear's command display, written in the same human white letters as before. You have now fired twice. We saved you from the third. Thalen stared at the words, and beneath his disciplined silence, something colder than fear began to grow. Because the message was not coming from Earth's government anymore. It was coming from under the ice. For 12 seconds after the message appeared, no one on Earth gave an order. The ocean chamber existed inside a silence that was not peace and not shock, but the thin, breathless space between discovering a miracle and realizing it might not belong to you. Mara then kept her hands on the console, because if she let go, she was afraid everyone would see them shaking. Around her, the faces of ministers, generals, engineers, and analysts reflected the same impossible question in different forms. They had believed the mirror net was humanity's last defense. They had believed every strange reaction, every bending shot, every contradictory targeting map came from a system humans had built out of disaster memory and stubborn genius. Now, something beneath Antarctica had spoken through it. General Sol's voice broke the silence first. Disconnect the Antarctic feed. Jonas Reeve moved instantly, almost gratefully, because a command was easier to obey than a revelation was to understand. His fingers swept across the interface, isolating the polar channel, sealing its handshake from the orbital layer, then from the oceanic layer, then from the lunar arrays. Each connection resisted for a fraction of a second longer than it should have, not with force, but with the soft refusal of a door that knew it had already been opened. Feed isolated, Jonas said. The main display cleared. Then the same white sentence appeared again. You have now fired twice. We saved you from the third. Jonas went pale. That is impossible. Mara looked at the words, and for one terrible moment, she understood exactly why the Union feared anomalies. Not because anomalies were dangerous by nature, but because power built on prediction could not survive anything that answered from outside the model. The Union had classified Earth. Before humans had shown military capability, they had come not because Earth was armed, but because something about Earth had already been marked as forbidden, and humanity had just awakened it. Above the planet, Fleet Executor Thalen ordered every ship in the containment shell to sever external data channels. The Dominion Spear's bridge became a storm of disciplined panic. Officers unplugged sensor relays, collapsed shared navigation feeds, and forced the fleet into manual isolation protocols designed for hostile machine intelligence. One by one, the vessels of the Armada went informationally blind to one another, relying only on visual confirmation and ancient line-of-sight signals. It was the first time in 700 years that a Union punishment fleet had been forced to behave like frightened ships instead of a single conquering mind. Thalen hated the humans for that more than he hated their defiance. Report, he demanded. His science officer stood very still before the central console. The third strike failed because the firing systems rejected the targeting solution. Machines do not reject lawful command. These did. Why? She hesitated too long. Thalen turned toward her with the full weight of his rank. Speak. The human network did not hack us, she said. It predicted the full causal chain of the shot and introduced a contradiction into our firing model. The weapons recognized the command as self-harm. A low murmur moved across the bridge. Thalen stepped closer. Explain. If we fired, the beam would have interacted with the altered debris field, reflected through our own containment geometry, and disabled 3 of our inner-ring vessels. The system saw the shot as unsafe before we did. Thalen's eyes narrowed. Then Earth protected us. The science officer did not answer, because the truth sounded too humiliating when spoken aloud. In the ocean chamber, Mara reached the same conclusion at almost the same moment. The mirror net had not saved Earth from the third strike. It had saved the Union from itself. The realization moved through her with the force of grief and wonder together, collapsing every simple shape the war had taken. Humanity had not built a weapon. Not truly. Even now, with enemy ships above every continent and 12 dead maintenance workers burning in the memory of the room, the system's deepest instinct had been preservation. It had stopped harm from spreading in both directions. That was when Mara finally understood what the Antarctic structure had recognized in them. Not strength, not violence, not dominance. Continuity. Humans were the species that built flood walls after drowning, hospitals after plagues, treaties after wars, warning systems after disasters, and songs after funerals. They failed, mourned, rebuilt, and encoded the lesson into tools so the next generation could survive what the last one had not. The mirror net was not humanity's imitation of alien power. It was humanity's oldest habit, made planetary. We need to know what that thing under the ice is, General Sol said. Mara turned toward the southern polar feed. I think it is not a weapon. A defense minister laughed once, sharp and bitter. That message just shut down an alien fleet's weapons. Yes, Mara said, to prevent a shot. That distinction will not matter if it decides to prevent us too. The objection hit exactly where Mara was already bleeding. She had spent her life building systems that made choices faster than people could during catastrophe, and every such system carried a moral wound inside it. To save a city from a flood, a barrier might divert water toward empty farmland. To stop a wildfire, drones might burn a forest before the flames reached homes. To preserve life at scale, machines sometimes made decisions individual humans could not bear to make. The mirror net had always required trust, but this was no longer only her system. Dr. Venn, Jonas said quietly. She looked at his screen. A new transmission had arrived, not from the Union, not from the Antarctic structure, but from the same unauthorized source inside the containment shell that had warned them before. The sender had bypassed the Union isolation protocols by using old optical pulse language through the shadow of Earth's moon. Whoever they were, they had either prepared for this moment years ago or belonged to a species that had learned to survive by hiding messages inside darkness. Jonas opened it. The translation appeared slowly. The buried intelligence is not Union. It is older than the Union, older than the mapped lanes. Worlds that awaken it are erased from public history. Your containment order was never about your weapons. It was about preventing contact. General Sol leaned over the console. Contact with what? The answer followed. With the architects. Every screen in the chamber flickered. Not from interference, from recognition. The Antarctic signal pulsed, once through the sealed channel, and this time it did not force itself into the mirror net. It offered something. A memory packet unfolded across the central display, compressed beyond any human archive structure, yet instantly understood by the network that had been built to translate disaster into response. Images formed inside the geometry. Not scenes, not recordings, but impressions of ancient worlds surrounded by fleets, civilizations brought to their knees, stars turned into borders, and silent structures buried beneath planets that had once chosen preservation over conquest. Mara saw Earth among them, not as it was now, blue and fragile beneath the Union Armada, but as it had been long before cities, before language, before human hands shaped stone. Something had come here in the deep past and hidden a question beneath the ice. Would this world become another empire, or something else? The mirror net answered by existing. That was the twist no one in the Union could have predicted. Humanity had not activated an alien weapon. Humanity had built, independently and painfully, the one kind of civilization the buried intelligence had been waiting for. A species whose greatest planetary system was designed not to dominate space, but to keep life alive. Above Earth, Thalenor received a final recovered fragment from the unauthorized transmission before his security teams breached the medical deck of Vessel 37. The sender's identity appeared for less than a second. A Union surgeon from a species officially listed as extinct. Then the channel died. On the main display of the Dominion Spear, Earth's visible surface remained calm, but a new light had appeared at the southern pole, faint at first, then widening beneath the ice like dawn trapped under glass. Across the containment shell, isolated Union ships began detecting the same thing and reporting it by old signal lamp because their shared network was still severed. Thalen stared at the growing polar light and understood, with a sickness deeper than defeat, that he had not come to contain humanity before it became dangerous. He had come too late to stop humanity from being chosen. The light beneath Antarctica did not rise like an explosion. It rose like a memory, deciding it had waited long enough. At first it was only a pale glow under the ice, a soft blue-white pulse spreading through cracks no satellite had ever mapped and no polar expedition had ever seen. Then the pulse deepened, and the entire southern continent became visible through storm cloud darkness and kilometers of frozen ancient pressure. From orbit, it looked as if Earth had opened one eye. Inside the ocean chamber, no one breathed easily. The ministers who had spent their lives arguing over borders now stood before a map that made borders feel childish. The generals who knew how to read missile arcs and fleet formations stared at symbols older than their species. The engineers who had trusted equations because equations did not care about politics watched the mirror net accept Antarctic geometry so smoothly that the distinction between human design and buried intelligence became harder to defend with every passing second. Mara Ven felt the weight of every gaze in the room, but she did not turn away from the display. Fear had finally caught up with awe. She could feel it in the chamber, sharp and contagious, because humanity had survived the Union's first strikes only to discover that survival had drawn the attention of something far stranger. They had built a rescue system to defend Earth. The system had answered a buried mind. Now that buried mind was waking beneath the oldest ice on the planet, and nobody knew whether it had chosen humanity as partner, instrument, or test. General Soul stepped beside Mara, close enough that only she could hear. "Tell me you can still control the net." Mara looked at the synchronization display. 52%, then 53, then 55, without any command from her console. "I can still speak to it," Mara said. "That is not what I asked." "No," Mara replied, her voice low, "but it is the honest answer." Before Soul could respond, every alarm in the chamber changed tone. The Union fleet had moved. On the central screen, 9,000 enemy ships that had spent the last hour in fractured uncertainty began reorganizing into a formation no longer designed for containment. The elegant shell around Earth tightened and flattened into overlapping attack lanes, each line angled not toward military installations, not toward orbital infrastructure, but toward the polar light. Thalen, or had understood the same thing humanity had. Whatever was waking under Antarctica mattered, and the Union was more afraid of it than it was of Earth. That fear made them faster. "Multiple power blooms," Jonas said. "They are charging heavy spinal weapons across the inner ring." General Sol's jaw hardened. "Target." Jonas swallowed. "Southern Hemisphere. Not one target. All of it." The room erupted, not into panic, but into the brutal urgency of people who suddenly understood the shape of the next minute. Defense ministers shouted for evacuation orders that could not move hundreds of millions fast enough. Military commanders demanded firing options that still did not exist. Engineers tried to force incomplete sections of the mirror net into active defense, but every projection returned the same conclusion. At 56% synchronization, the net could bend limited strikes, confuse targeting, and protect narrow corridors. It could not yet catch a coordinated hemisphere burn from the full armada. Mara felt the numbers strike her harder than any accusation could have. The Union was not trying to punish Earth anymore. It was trying to cauterize it. Above the planet, Thalen stood on the bridge of the Dominion spear and gave the order that would end his career if he failed and stain his name forever if he succeeded. Around him, officers moved with the terrified discipline of those who knew history would either bury them or justify them. The official language on his command display called the Operation Strategic Contamination Prevention. The older, uglier military term appeared in a restricted sidebar, Planetary Excision. His science officer stared at the firing sequence with open horror. "Executor, the surface population in projected blast zones exceeds 2 billion. Thalen did not look at her. "The Union has buried entire civilizations to prevent architect resurgence. Those records are sealed because they were crimes. They were necessities." She turned fully toward him now, all pretense gone. "If humans are communicating with the architects, they are doing it through a preservation system. They have not attacked civilians. They prevented our third strike from killing our own crews. This does not match contamination doctrine." For a moment, Thalen said nothing. Beyond the forward glass, Earth turned beneath them, blue and white and alive in a way Union maps had never captured. Somewhere down there, billions of beings looked up without knowing which second might become their last. He hated that the thought came to him with faces now. He hated the unauthorized surgeon who had planted doubt inside his fleet. He hated humanity for surviving with dignity, because dignity made obedience harder to enforce. Then he sealed the firing order with his command blood. "History is written by the civilizations that remain," he said. The spinal weapons aligned. In the ocean chamber, Mara watched the countdown appear across every strategic display at once. 90 seconds. The mirror net reached 59% and stalled. It needed more input, more alignment, more time. But time was the one resource no human invention had ever been able to manufacture. Then the Antarctic signal changed. The black geometry unfolded again, this time not as warning, not as memory, but as invitation. A new path appeared inside the mirror net's core architecture, branching through systems Mara had intentionally kept separate for safety. Hospital triage AIs, emergency broadcast networks, civilian navigation, weather prediction, agricultural distribution, school communication grids, local disaster volunteer channels, every human system designed to coordinate strangers under pressure. Jonas saw it and looked up in disbelief. It wants permission to connect through the civilian layer. A minister recoiled. "Absolutely not. That is global access." General Sol stared at Mara. "What happens if we allow it?" Mara read the projections, but the answer was not purely technical. The civilian layer was humanity's most chaotic network because it contained humanity itself. Languages, requests, warnings, grief, traffic, prayers, children messaging parents, doctors moving patients, farmers watching rainfall, pilots rerouting storms, millions of ordinary decisions pulsing through machines built to help people survive daily life. No military system would ever willingly invite that much disorder into a planetary defense grid. But the Union predicted weapons, command chains, and fear. It did not know how to predict people saving one another. The countdown hit 60 seconds. Mara, Sol said. Mara thought of the Atlantic elevator crew. She thought of every flood map she had drawn too late, every city saved by 5 minutes, every disaster report that ended with the same unbearable phrase, "If warning had arrived sooner." She understood then why the buried intelligence had not simply taken control. It was asking the same question it had buried beneath Earth before humanity existed. Would this world choose control or trust? Mara opened the civilian layer. Earth answered, not as one voice, but as billions of tiny acts of coordination. Phones lit in sleeping hands. Hospital systems rerouted power before being asked. Fishing vessels in the Indian Ocean shifted position to become signal reflectors. Mountain observatories opened ancient backup dishes. Children's classroom satellites, built for remote education, joined the orbital lattice. Amateur astronomers locked telescopes onto Union ships and fed visual data into the net. Airliners adjusted course. Weather stations surrendered bandwidth. Old radio towers, museum transmitters, disaster sirens, rescue drones, farm sensors, and personal devices across every continent became part of a living planetary reflex. The mirror net surged from 59% to 81%. Union targeting collapsed. The first spinal beam fired anyway. It came down like a white spear meant to split the southern world, but the sky moved before it arrived. Light from a million sources caught the beam's prediction, not the beam itself, and fed the prediction through human chaos, so dense that Union mathematics could not simplify it. The weapon bent, fractured across false paths, and spilled harmlessly into the upper atmosphere as auroras blooming over half the planet. The second beam fired, then the third, then hundreds. Earth did not strike back. Earth caught them. Across the night side, people looked up and saw the sky fill with curtains of impossible fire, blue and green and violet, not knowing that each beautiful wave had once been meant to erase a city. In the ocean chamber, hardened commanders wept openly. Jonas laughed once through tears he did not try to hide. General Sol stood motionless, watching humanity's scattered, messy, stubborn civilization become the shield no empire could understand. Above them, Union ships began to lose formation, not from damage, but from disbelief. Then the mirror net transmitted on every frequency in the Armada. Not in human letters this time, but in every language the Union had ever used to command surrender. You aimed at a world. A pause followed, long enough for every captain to read it. A world aimed back, by choosing to live. The Union fleet did not retreat. That was the first thing Mara Ven understood when the auroras faded and the weapon fire stopped. The Armada had failed to burn the southern hemisphere. It had failed to destroy the polar light. It had failed to force Earth back into the shape of a frightened world waiting for permission to survive. Yet the 9,000 ships above the planet remained where they were, wounded not in hull but in certainty. And certainty was the one wound empires always tried to heal with more violence. Inside the ocean chamber, the air felt heavier than it had before. The first wave had been survived, but survival had not brought relief. It had brought exposure. Every civilian system on Earth was now tied into the mirror net. Every hospital, school relay, weather station, fishing vessel, observatory, cargo route, and personal device that had answered the call was part of a planetary defense reflex, so vast that no one could pretend it was hidden anymore. Humanity had shown the Union what it was. Now the Union had to decide whether to fear it or erase it. Mara stood before the central display and watched the synchronization level stabilize at 84%. The number should have inspired hope. Instead, it chilled her. The net was more powerful than it had ever been. But it was also more open, more alive, and more vulnerable to consequences no one had modeled. If the Union found a way to poison the civilian layer, the shield protecting Earth could become the pathway through which Earth broke itself. General Sol saw the same danger in Mara's silence. What are they doing? Jonas Reeves scanned the fractured enemy formation, his face still wet from tears he had forgotten to wipe away. They are pulling their inner ring back. Not leaving. Making room. For what? The answer arrived before Jonas could speak. At the far edge of the containment shell, 3 Union capital vessels separated from the fleet and opened their spinal cores. They did not charge beams. They did not align missiles. Instead, each ship released a dark metallic cylinder the size of a city block, objects so dense that the mirror net briefly classified them as falling moons. The cylinders drifted forward with terrible patience, unpowered, cold, and silent. Mara felt the Antarctic geometry pulse once beneath the system, and for the first time since it awakened, the signal carried something like alarm. Jonas read the incoming data, and his voice dropped. They are not weapons in the normal sense. No reactor bloom, no guidance field, no explosive signature. General Sol's eyes hardened. Then what are they? Mara answered before the model finished forming. Anchors. The word seemed to pull heat from the room 12 years earlier. Inside a sealed briefing room no government later admitted existed, Mara had seen one incomplete reference to Union anchor technology. It had been dismissed as myth, a relic from erased campaigns, a device used not to destroy planets, but to make them irrelevant. Anchors did not burn cities. They pinned space. They locked gravitational interpretation around a world and forced every navigation system, every orbital path, every active field into one fixed mathematical truth. Against a normal enemy, that meant escape became impossible. Against the mirror net, it meant something far worse. It would stop the sky from improvising. Can we redirect them? Sol asked. Not yet. Can we destroy them? Mara stared at the dark cylinders crossing the upper void. If we fire enough mass from lunar launchers, maybe. But that would make us the first side to launch a direct offensive strike. A defense minister snapped. They just tried to burn half the planet. And the whole galaxy saw us refuse to answer as executioners, Mara said. That matters. It will not matter if we are dead. No one argued with that. Above Earth, Fleet Executor Thalen watched the anchors deploy and felt no triumph. His bridge was quieter than before, but not calmer. The failed excision had changed the crew in ways discipline could not erase. Officers still obeyed, but their obedience had edges now. They had seen Earth catch enough fire to kill billions and turn it into light. They had heard the mirror net speak in the surrender languages of conquered peoples. Some of them had begun to wonder whether they were enforcing law or burying evidence. Thalen could feel that question moving through his fleet like rot, so he gave them a simpler one. Once the anchors stabilize, Earth's anomalous network will lose adaptive capacity, he said over command channel. We will offer one final surrender demand. If they refuse, we isolate the planet permanently and remove the polar source. His science officer stood behind him, very still. Executor, removing the polar source after anchor stabilization may fracture the planetary field. Define fracture. She did not soften the answer. Continental scale crust failure, atmospheric ignition pockets, ocean displacement. The casualties could exceed the excision projection. Thalen closed his eyes once. When he opened them, the blue world below seemed brighter than he wanted it to be. Then they should surrender. In the ocean chamber, the final demand arrived in every official human language at once. Deactivate the anomalous network. Surrender the polar intelligence. Submit all global systems to Union quarantine control. Refusal will result in permanent containment and surgical removal of the contamination source. For 10 seconds, humanity had nothing to say. Then Earth began answering without permission. Messages flooded the civilian layer, not commands, not military orders, but voices. A surgeon in Lagos refused to disconnect her hospital grid because the shield was using it to protect children under an evacuation dome. A schoolteacher in Manila kept her classroom's satellite aligned even after officials told non-essential networks to stand by. A retired radio operator in Peru reopened a mountain transmitter and sent 3 words into the net, still holding signal. Fishing crews, miners, pilots, farmers, night shift nurses, storm trackers, orbital mechanics, and children holding phones up to windows became data points the Union had no doctrine to understand. Mara watched the flood of human refusal and felt the terrible beauty of it. The mirror net was no longer waiting for her alone. It was listening to everyone. The anchors crossed the lunar boundary. Synchronization dropped from 84 to 79. Every screen flickered. Jonas swore under his breath. They are already affecting predictive flexibility. Mara looked at the Antarctic Channel. The buried intelligence was offering another path now, brighter and more direct than before. It could override the civilian layer, seize full control of every connected system, and use the complete mirror net to crush the anchors before they locked. The projection appeared with brutal clarity. It would work. Earth would survive the next 10 minutes. But the cost made Mara's stomach twist. Every connected human system would become subordinate to the Antarctic intelligence. No delay, no consent, no human chaos. The world would be saved by becoming exactly what the Union feared, a planet controlled by something older than itself. General Sol read the same projection. Can it stop them? Yes. Can we take control back afterward? Mara did not answer quickly enough. Sol stepped closer. Mara, I do not know. The anchors crossed another threshold. Synchronization dropped to 72. For the first time since the civilian layer opened, gaps appeared in the Aurora shield. Union ships began charging again, cautious but encouraged by the weakening field. The planet that had felt untouchable minutes before was becoming readable, and every empire in history had mistaken readability for ownership. Mara placed both hands on the console. The Antarctic intelligence waited. The Union anchors advanced. Earth's billions continued to hold the shield together with ordinary signals, stubborn voices, and fragile trust. Mara had one choice left, and both answers could end the world. Mara Ven did not give the buried intelligence control. She gave it a question. Her fingers moved across the console with the steadiness of someone who had already accepted that history might hate her for the next decision. Around her, the ocean chamber trembled under the pressure of a world holding its breath. The Union anchors advanced across the lunar boundary like dark verdicts, and every meter they crossed made the mirror net less flexible, less human, less able to turn chaos into protection. Above Earth, enemy weapons warmed again. Below Earth, billions of ordinary signals flickered inside the civilian layer, terrified and stubborn and alive. General Sol saw the command string Mara was building and stepped closer. That is not an override. No, Mara said. It is a vote. Jonas looked up sharply. A vote by whom? Mara's eyes stayed on the screen. Everyone connected. The Antarctic intelligence pulsed once, not in refusal, but in confusion. It had offered certainty. It had offered survival through control. It had offered to become the hand that moved every human system faster than fear could interfere. But humanity had not come this far by becoming one perfect machine. Humanity had survived because strangers chose each other before they understood each other, because warning systems existed for people who might never know who built them, because civilization was not obedience, It was trust repeated until it became infrastructure. Mara opened the command to the civilian layer. Across Earth, the question appeared wherever the mirror net had touched a screen, a radio, a satellite link, a hospital console, a school relay, a fishing beacon, a storm station, or a child shaking phone. Give full defense authority to the Antarctic intelligence, or keep human consent active and risk failure. No speech followed. No leader framed the choice. No government softened it. Humanity had seconds, not hours, and the Union anchors were already bending the sky into simpler mathematics. Mara watched the response field awaken, expecting confusion, expecting delay, expecting the unbearable cost of trusting billions at the edge of extinction. Instead, Earth answered faster than any council ever had. Hospitals voted to keep consent. Rescue networks voted to keep consent. Pilots voted to keep consent. Miners on Luna voted to keep consent. Farmers, teachers, engineers, firefighters, storm trackers, orbital crews, power grid workers, and old radio operators voted to keep consent. Not all of them understood the Antarctic intelligence. Not all of them understood the Union anchors, but they understood the shape of the choice. Survival, without a human hand on the door, was not victory. It was a quieter kind of surrender. The Antarctic signal pulsed again. This time it changed. The geometry that had once looked cold and impossible unfolded into something new, not simpler, but more open. It stopped trying to replace the human network and began fitting itself around it. It accepted hesitation. It accepted contradiction. It accepted grief, fear, courage, and imperfect consent as variables, not errors. For the first time since it woke, the buried intelligence did not guide the mirror net like an ancient master correcting a younger species. It joined humanity as one more responder in the disaster. The synchronization display shattered its own scale. 80% became 90. 90 became unreadable. Then the percentage vanished entirely, replaced by a phrase no engineer had programmed. Consensus achieved. The anchors locked. For one terrible second, the sky froze. Union ships stabilized. Firing lines sharpened. Earth became readable again. Fleet Executor Thalen saw the tactical display clear, saw the planet pinned beneath him, saw the path to victory open in perfect blue certainty. Relief moved through his bridge like a drug. The humans had refused control. They had chosen weakness. They had chosen the slow mess of consent over the clean speed of survival. Fire, Thalen said. The Armada obeyed. Every weapon in the inner ring discharged toward Earth at once, and every beam stopped halfway down. They did not bend away. They did not scatter into aurora. They hung in the upper atmosphere. Thousands of white spears suspended above the world, frozen inside a lattice of human signals and Antarctic geometry. For a moment, the entire planet stood beneath a crown of captured fire. Then the mirror net did the one thing the Union had never modeled, because no empire had ever believed restraint could be stronger than retaliation. It returned nothing. The beams folded inward, stripped of direction, drained of violence, and dispersed into harmless light that spread around Earth like sunrise. The anchors cracked, not from impact, but from paradox. They had pinned space to make the mirror net predictable, but the net was no longer trying to evade prediction. It had chosen a single truth, so vast the anchors could not contain it. Earth would live, and it would not become the Union to do so. One by one, the dark cylinders split open and went silent. Across the Union fleet, weapons shut down. Engines locked. Command channels opened against protocol, carrying not human threats, but the recorded evidence of the attempted planetary excision, the anchor deployment, and every erased containment file hidden inside Union archives. The mirror net had not hacked their systems to destroy them. It had released the truth to every ship, every crew, every member world, and every conquered species that still remembered how to whisper. On the Dominion spear, Thalen watched his empire begin to fall without a single human shot fired. His science officer removed her command insignia and placed it on the console. Then another officer did the same. Then another. Below them, in the ocean chamber, nobody cheered at first. The silence after survival was too large. Mara stood before the display, seeing the empty place where the Atlantic elevator had been, seeing the billions of signals still glowing across the civilian layer, seeing the Antarctic light settle beneath the ice like a guardian returning to sleep with one eye open. General Sol touched her shoulder. "Is it over?" Mara looked at the Union fleet, immobilized but alive. She looked at the flood of incoming transmissions from worlds that had once been classified, contained, erased, or frightened into obedience. She looked at one message repeating from thousands of distant systems. How did Earth survive? Mara exhaled, and for the first time since the fleet arrived, her voice broke. By refusing to become what came for us. Far above, the captured fire faded from the sky. Across Earth, people stepped out of shelters, hospitals, schools, tunnels, ships, and ruined stations to watch dawn arrive in every time zone at once. The world had not won because it was stronger. It had won because, when an empire aimed death at it, humanity answered with every tool it had ever built to keep someone alive. And beneath Antarctica, before the signal went quiet, the buried intelligence sent one final message into the mirror net. Phase 1 complete.